Morning, everyone. All right. I see a Chris on. Is that Chris Hillier or?
Nope.
Oh, okay. All good. Thanks. So today, Chris Hillier, who penned an ownership transfer spec, has put it out for review and has gotten some comments. So today we can go over those comments. He did mention he'd be a little bit late, so we will sit in a holding pattern for probably another couple minutes.
Hey, Jeff, this is Eric Hibbert. I have a question about OCP Safe.
Yes. I hope I can answer. I probably can't, but.
Well, maybe. So on behalf of Samsung, I've been reviewing some of the website materials. What I'm discovering is that if one were interested in pursuing it, either as a SRP or as a product, it's pretty hard to find any contact information, including the approved SRPs.
Okay.
I'm hoping that we can kind of get that fixed. I've got some inquiries in, but I wanted to bring it to attention because I guess Safe kind of is a subset of this project.
Yes. So I guess I can definitely route that. I think it makes sense to fix up. I think I also have looked out and it said if you're interested, contact Brian or
Just
Jeff.
look at step 2, and you kind of go into the bin bucket.
Okay, I will. Yes.
So also a suggestion, because it's been a while since we've heard from the Safe folks. Is that a topic we want to put on the agenda here? Would people be interested in that? I mean, I noticed that the documentation has gotten a lot more. Well, a lot of the details have been filled in. But one of the one of the questions that I posed, because it was not clear to me, is the connection between Safe and some of the other specifications.
Okay.
Yeah, Calyptro would be a good example of that.
Well, that would be the other one. I looked at the SK Hynix, initial cert as well, and it points at an older NVMe spec. But when I look at the details that that the Safe assessment is being performed against, it doesn't look like it's actually looking at the full set of requirements from any of the specs. So some clarity on that would be, I think, really helpful as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's good feedback. I know that Safe submitted an abstract for the OSP regional conference. I will get in touch with the team and let them know that there's interest in potentially speaking in this forum as well.
That'd be cool. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for the feedback about the contact. Yeah, I'll get in touch with the program runners on that.
Okay.
All right. I see Chris Hillier's online. Welcome.
Welcome.
So I've already introduced the topic, the ownership transfer spec comment feedback review thon. So feel free to share screen and.
Oh, okay. I think.
Or I'm happy to. Either way, however you want to do
it. I am not ready. Let me see if I can be ready.
No.
I don't know. I don't know that there's a ton of comments. To comprise an hour meeting, but we can. We can give it a rip.
Yeah. You can talk about how glorious your writing is.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Could you leave that as a comment, like in the first sentence, so everybody sees it when they first load it? Okay, let me see if I'm going to be able to screen share. Is this working?
Yes, we can see it. If you could bump the font size up a little bit. Perfect.
Okay, so first comment, I'm just going to go through comments that have been left. I might have to back down a bit. So first comment was from Tiru here asking about, does DoT address multiple transfers from device manufacturer to vendor? I apologize, I'm not sure if you're on the call today. If you are, please holler. The answer here is that I was unclear whether multiple transfers from manufacturer to vendor to end customer, whether this meant multiple. So previously, when we've discussed ownership transfer, we've talked about the concept of having like tiered owners where you have, say, device vendor to device owner to tenant, right? And we've talked about theoretical maximums for the number of ownership layers or tiers you might need. And I was unclear whether this question was a reference to that concept, which is the multiple layers, or whether this was a question around how many transfers can you perform, right? As in, is this hard limited by a number of fuses or something of the sort? So I left a comment based. Go
I
ahead.
think that I think that is what Tiru means here. That is any specific limit, because if you are doing through OTP, right, then there will be a certain number of fuses that you can burn, right? So
Yeah.
Actually, I have a related question, because if there's a multiple transfer, how do you keep track of the custody chains, the chain of owners? How do you maintain the history of ownership for a specific device?
Yeah, so okay, so a couple. Let me answer the first question first, right, or respond to the first topic. So with regards to the first comment, this document in its current form does not specify the what I would say storage media to be used for ownership keys, right? So we specifically don't say in fuses, in OTP, in other non-volatile storage. That's not specified as part of this document, right? So I mean, I think one of the opens that's noted at the end is something that has to do with that balance of, if we feel like it's necessary to state specific types of storage, which I personally am not currently a fan of. Do you have to impose a minimum number of transfers that are required, right? So that's the answer to the first one, is that I would say that that's a valuable area where feedback around storage media and number of transfers would be useful. The answer to your second question is that in this ownership transfer architecture, that history is not captured as part of the ownership transfer. That's just not, it's not as in scope as a requirement of needing to capture that history. You have the point in time statement of who's the current owner, right? And there's some multi-layer schemes like I advised here later in the doc in the tenancy transfer section, but otherwise that history is not something that's captured.
In earlier calls, we had discussed the necessity for history, and the outcome of that, as I recall, was that's really hard to maintain and reason about, and the value is rather tenuous when you have attestation of your current boot state.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those conversations are what led to not including it as a requirement. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Because I am just new to the OCP, so I was not sure about the history, because I thought history is this track of study chain is important for auditing purpose, right? Later on, if something happens and where things went wrong and all that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it might be a valuable forensic signal if you can keep it. And I think this spec doesn't preclude you from doing that.
Okay.
It just
Yeah.
doesn't say you have to.
Yeah, it's just not built into it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think kind of the point was that with the different types of locking, there's only two types of secrets that you might need to worry about, and is to show that those are managed appropriately when you're transferring ownership. So it should be totally clean and safe when you transfer. There's no history that could spill over from one owner to the next.
Mm.
Okay, I'm going to keep going unless there are other comments there. Also, if people are adding comments live as we're here, just give me a heads up if I need to scroll back up. Victor TV volatile, I think this is a typo, and I'm going to reject your suggestion, Victor. Apologies. Okay, so comment from Roger on tenancy transfer. So this is the section that I was referencing above about how this is still sort of under discussion, right? I mean, the need for tenancy transfer, again, the multi-layered scheme. There's been some discussion. From my opinion, I don't know that we ever bottomed out on this, right? I've heard differing views of whether it's needed, whether it's not needed. Okay, so question is, does it mean that the CAK for the tenant? Okay, so just to for folks who haven't read the document, just to like for the purpose of level setting, CAK is the key pair associated with actually signing firmware. So this is not the locking key. This is the actual signing key for firmware itself. Does it mean that the CAK for tenant will be generated by device owner? What if tenant wants to generate their own CAK? Okay, so this is proposing a multi-party agreement around tenancy transfer, where basically you could have something where volatile DOT, where the DOT CAK key pair is owned by the tenant, and then yeah. So I'm not proposing that the CAK is generated by the device owner, right? This would need to be what I'm proposing here. There would need to be some sort of, I'll say out of band, and I don't mean out of band as in like system architecture out of band. I mean more like provided by hyperscaler mechanism for providing tenant desired CAK to hyperscaler for installation, right? I mean, this is assuming a, okay, it depends on how far into the weeds you want to get, right? I mean, so for example, there's no requirement in this document that states that ownership transfer shall only be allowed via out-of-band interfaces, right? So depending on device type in question, I mean, I naturally am pretty inclined to think about GPUs, right? You could theoretically say that a device would allow for ownership transfer commands from an in-band tenant, right? In which case it would be directly delivered. However, there's also some concerns in terms of security model where maybe you don't want to allow that, right? I don't know how far down the path of mandating in-band versus out-of-band key delivery for ownership transfer we need to go or want to go. This is, and then I also don't know that we need to specify what these sort of out-of-band mechanisms for key sharing could look like. But do any of those comments make sense? I'm not sure if Raj is on the call here today.
Yeah, I, mean, I personally think that I think the basic question is how do you realize this tofu thing, this trust on first use, and how do you actually transfer the CAK and LAK and all those things? How do you, what is authentication mechanism or what is key management mechanism for that? I guess that is not set, specified in this specification, right?
Okay, so with regards to your first thing about the trust on first use, right? I mean, the idea with trust on first use is that it is generally speaking that you sort of you attest to state a device prior to taking ownership, prior to performing actions, right? So you don't need explicit authorization from, say, the device vendor to the device owner in order to perform an ownership transfer, right? You need authorization to go from an owner back to a device vendor when you're in a mutable locking state, but you then don't have to authorize the transfer to the next owner, for example, right? So trust on first use is really sort of that leaning into attestation piece, right, and not requiring authorization from vendor to owner. What were you going to say?
Yeah, what I was trying to, I mean, maybe I'm not as clear about the thing, but how do you actually transfer CAK to the volatile memory, right? You have to have some kind of authentication mechanism with the root of trust there, right? To
No.
transfer. Okay.
So that's the point of, I mean, this is part of the point of the architecture, is that there is no authentication or authorization on that first key install, right? So if you want to go from the vendor back, or sorry, if you want to go from an owner back to the vendor and you're using the mutable locking archetype, then yes, you have to authorize that transfer, right? But are you asking about like actual like protocols interfaces for doing this? Like,
Yeah.
are we going to do this over I2C with is that like what you're asking, or?
Yeah, so I just say, how do you actually install, say, CAK in the volatile memory, right? So what is the mechanism? Is that it is not specified, or it is basically vendor has to find out a way of doing it, or
We need to
what is
decide.
the
Yeah, we need to decide how far down that path we go, right?
Okay.
So I mean, if desired, we can certainly provide additional details about how NVIDIA has built this, right?
Okay.
And we can use that as a starting point. But I also welcome feedback from like Jeff and Eric and others, right, about how far down this how far down this path do we need to go in terms of outright, like, do we need to write a table that has a command structure with what the request and response looks like, how many bytes in each one, and like this is how you do it, you use SPDM for this other piece, like, is that how far we want to go, or do we want to leave it in kind of the form here? And that's a question, that's not a statement.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I mean, are there immediate thoughts? Like, Jeff, do you have any thoughts?
I think it's a good question. I don't have an immediate answer to it. I would, yeah. I feel like maybe let's let this doc soak a little bit in its current incarnation, see if it needs to be more fleshed out.
Sure. I still don't feel like going back to the original comment, though, it feels like we talked about some other things. Does this comment still stand, or?
Yeah, I need to talk to Raj. Actually, I have to. Yeah, he is my colleague, so I didn't have a chance to talk to him. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to keep scrolling then. I think the RMA repair section is one that's almost straight lifted from the old OCP ownership transfer doc, so feedback there would be useful. And then Brian left a comment around the DOT being a measured attribute and folding in identity into DOT. We've talked about this. I'd like to better understand a proposal for how we think we want to do that. This doesn't preclude doing such a thing. I just would need to write it into the spec of how do we interleave these things. Is Brian on the call?
I think you mentioned he'd be a half hour late, so he'd probably be on in about 10 minutes.
Was it you? Someone had mentioned before that you had an idea for how to do this in terms of like crypt, like what you wanted to do for measurement or something of the sort to interleave dice with DOT. Do you remember what that was?
I don't know what I might have said at that point, but I do have thoughts. I guess I have such thoughts now. And specifically, we can talk about like how Calyptra does it, which is one way of doing it. Where,
sure.
But and at a high level, I think that there's two ways of. So the topic is, how do I attest to my CAC public key, basically, like who owns me? Either you can add a digest of the key as an attribute. Well, okay, you can stick in an SPDM measurement block, right? Whoever asked for the measurement block can clearly see what it is, and there you go. You could you could then you could definitely put it as an attribute of your dice chain. At some point in the cert hierarchy, just say, hey, I have a TCG dice firmware ID with this particular type, and the digest is the CAC public key, so you can see it there. both of those approaches require the verifier to be smart enough to go and know where to look. Say, I need to get that measurement block, or I need to go look at that layer firmware ID extension, blah, which is totally doable. And I mean, we do expect verifiers to know how to go look for things, but it is work, right? Another way of doing it, which is what Calyptra does, is to say, actually, we're going to take the digest of the CAC public key and KDF it into the computation of the actual dice key pair at a certain layer. So at that point, what you can do, it would also be as an attribute of it, so it's there too. But what that allows you to do at that point is say, let's slap a certificate on that key, and now if the CAC public key ever changes, the measurements change, and not only will the attribute change, but the key pair itself would change, meaning the certificate you minted for that would no longer be valid, which allows downstream verifiers not have to be smart enough or care to go look at the CAC. Just say, well, if the certificate's valid, I know the CAC is good, or whatever. Whoever signed that certificate, they're satisfied, ergo I'm satisfied, and we can move on. So
that certificate will be signed by the dice layer, right?
Yes. So the certificate would be signed part of a dice layer. It's like in Calyptra, right? This is captured in the FMC alias certificate, where the device ID key would sign the FMC alias key as part of the certificate and put the equivalent of the CAC public key in its extension. Yeah.
When you the KDF, you put the measurement of FMC measurement, and also you put the measurement of this key, CAC key, right?
That's right. And the expectation there would be that obviously, like if the CAC if the CAC key pair changes, the KDF changes, you'll get a new dice hierarchy, and it will all come certified because the device does that on boot every time. But the idea is that you could point an external certificate authority at that and issue its own certificate over the FMC key pair. And then other verifiers can just route back to what that other CA did and not have to walk the dice chain all the way back down to the to the device ID key.
So basically, the owner is going to sign this certificate, right?
That is the idea, is that it allows that flow.
Okay.
It doesn't require it. Like if you're a smart enough verifier, you can walk all the way down to the vendor and look at the extensions and be fine that way. But if you opt into it, you can also point your own owner CA at the FMC key pair.
Okay.
So I think when Brian says perpetual measurement parsing, I think what he's referring to is always going to look at the measurement extension or the extension data.
Okay, so here's what I would like to do, right? Is I would like to say Jeff Anderson. Will this tag you here? Do you have access here?
I do, yeah.
Jeff Anderson to flesh out, say, add section on this topic. Am I allowed to assign you action items, Jeff? Is that a thing I can do?
Yeah, I think.
Is that we want to make sure you guys know extra 5-10 minutes is going to be a good idea.
Please mute.
I don't have host powers right now, unfortunately, but okay.
I'm basically saying that you can write. I'm asking you to write a brief section on this.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you.
Does anyone have thoughts on those approaches that I just said? Or, I mean, I can just write a section saying them all.
I don't have an immediate thought.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So Jeff, just thinking, and it's probably the next section might even be, it would be good if we could sync up, get this this Chris's proposal here in line with Calyptra and make whatever the specs and implementation line up so that Calyptra is, dot 2.0 or, everybody's in line and in sync. So can we make a small working group to, I'd be happy to chat with you and maybe
Okay.
Chris, and let's figure out this, get this in line.
Does Calyptra care about any of this? I thought it basically just got a key from somewhere and it didn't really have any opinions on how that key was managed or came from.
It doesn't have an opinion on how the CAC pub gets delivered. It does say that, the mutable code of Calyptra needs to be signed by a key with CAC, that one could call a CAC pub. And then it does things with CAC pub. So
I think the fact that Calyptra is like a real thing that we can look at might force the conversation rather than a lot of hypotheticals. It's at least an instance of something we'd like to build.
Mhm.
Okay. I added a comment here. We already had this section at the end, but I added a comment saying that the three of us can discuss.
Awesome.
Okay. There's no other comments here. There was an email comment from Brian about, he was actually asking if we could delete this section, Eric. He was saying, can we remove this section, as well as I think maybe the for further discussion, and basically snap to V1.
Okay. Just stop me. Just call something done and move on. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, we should talk. The question I had for Brian via email was, what down here is required for V1, right? So if the answer is, well, we want to have alignment with Calyptra, or we want to understand how the archetypes lay over Calyptra, or we want to close on the dice identity thing before we snap to V1, then sure, that's the answer, right? I don't think he's replied to my email, but
yeah, I think we could have this call and probably get this sorted out fairly quickly in terms of what work needs to be done to have everything in sync. Maybe we're almost there. It's just some language.
okay.
But yes, yep. Getting to V1 quickly sounds useful.
Yes, and yeah, once we decide what's in or out of scope V1, yeah, we can nuke whatever's not part of it. So yeah.
So is it worth here waiting a minute or two to, I don't have any other comments here. Is it worth waiting a minute or two for Brian to ostensibly join to try to hash out live, or what do we want to do?
I'm okay if we've exhausted comments. I'm okay kind of calling it a shorter meeting.
Okay.
So cool. Thank you for running us through that. Is there any
Yeah,
helpful?
so I mean, I guess this is also the call for people who haven't had a chance or haven't left any comments. Please review, please leave comments.
Yeah, definitely.
So, okay.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Minutes will have a link to this doc. All right. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone, for the feedback and discussion. Okay, the OSP safe stuff. I'll go send an email about that right now. Thanks, all. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Better. Yeah. Oh, there it is. Nothing. The majority of the distributors are especially volunteers, they're all. So the majority of the distributors. I think. Well, no, options, but also. Are you doing?